Lyra Voss stood in the center of the Galactic Council chamber, a place that smelled vaguely like burnt toast and self-importance. Putting Earth on trial for being a little too inspirational wasn't exactly how she'd planned to spend her Tuesday. She adjusted her suit, the fabric stubbornly resisting her attempts to look professional. Judge Calix, a gelatinous mass with a penchant for wearing what could only be described as glorified disco balls, peered down at her from the bench. His voice oozed from multiple flaps on his amorphous body, a sound not unlike a cat gargling marbles. Ambassador Voss, we are gathered here today because your species has, quite unintentionally, spearheaded a theological revolution. Pray tell, how did you manage to do so with such impressive incompetence? Lyra resisted the urge to roll her eyes. Your Honor, we didn't mean to start a religion. We were just making a documentary about life on Earth. You know, pandas, sunsets, the typical aren't we adorable montage. Turns out some species thought it was divine scripture. The gospel of the grizzly bear was particularly compelling, Calix acknowledged, if acknowledgement could be coded in disdain. Yet it has led to galactic unrest. You've upset the balance, Ms. Voss. Do you have any idea what chaos a cult centered around honey worship can do? Lyra threw up her hands. Look, I'm sorry some aliens have decided to take Winnie the Pooh a bit too seriously, but is that really our fault? I can't be responsible for people who watch TV with their third eye open. Beside her, Ambassador Grug, representative of the Blarxus species, leaned in, his voice a low growl that sounded like rocks grinding together. The humans must pay for their transgressions. Order must be restored. We cannot have entire planets dedicating their lives to bare necessities. Lyra grimaced. I bet your species would love a planet where everything's all about honey and singing about necessities. Might lighten you guys up a bit. Grug's eyes narrowed, glittering like shards of obsidian. The Blarxus have no need for such frivolities. We find joy in conquest, not confectionery. Charming, Lyra muttered under her breath, not quite sure if she meant it. Calix's form shimmered, the disco ball effect making her squint. Enough, Ambassador Voss. Your defense, if we can call it that, is lacking. Your species' inadvertent evangelism has led to an interstellar crisis. Lyra tried to maintain a semblance of diplomacy, even as she felt like a substitute teacher in a class of delinquent demigods. Surely, there's another way to handle this. Maybe a galactic memo saying, hey, humans are just idiots, don't mind us. Calix shook, a ripple passing through his blobby mass that indicated amusement. Or indigestion. Hard to tell with these gelatinous types. Your suggestion is noted, but the Council must deliberate on the consequences of your species' actions. Perhaps you've heard of the incident on planet Zog, Lyra sighed. Ah yes, the Great Zog Revolution where everyone decided wearing bear costumes to work was a spiritual necessity. I'm sure their productivity has never been higher. A murmur of agreement or perhaps just a collective stomach rumble filled the chamber. Judge Calix continued, the trial will determine whether Earth should face sanctions or perhaps an embargo on cultural transmissions. We cannot have such dissections of reality spreading unchecked. Lyra frowned. Sanctions. Our economy's about as buoyant as a lead balloon already. And as for cultural transmissions, we stopped sending reality TV for a reason. We thought we were doing the galaxy a favor. Grug crossed his thick arms, emitting a sound somewhere between a growl and a chuckle. Ignorance is no defense, Voss. Your people's idiocy has become their own gallows. She shot him a look. Thanks for the support, Grug. Always nice to have a frenemy in the room. Judge Calix, possibly bored or just enjoying the sound of his own voice, droned on. Let us not forget, the repercussions of your actions have led to cross-species conflicts. The Flurgans are at war with the Smorphs over the correct interpretation of the 100-acre woostrit. Lyra pinched the bridge of her nose. This was like explaining to a dog why it couldn't eat chocolate, frustrating, futile, and slightly ridiculous. Look, give us a chance to make amends. We'll put out a universal disclaimer. Humans say a lot of things. Most of them are nonsense. Calyx seemed to ponder this, his form jiggling in a way that suggested he might just be a sentient jello mold. You have until the end of this session to present a viable solution. Otherwise, Earth faces isolation, isolation. The word bounced around her skull like a pinball. Earth cut off from the rest of the galaxy, left to stew in its own juices. Right, she said, trying to sound more optimistic than she felt. No pressure. The session adjourned, alien diplomats dispersing like disgruntled pigeons. Lyra lingered, absorbing the weight of the task ahead. She imagined telling Earth's leaders, hey, no more Netflix and chill with aliens. We're banned. A voice broke her reverie, smooth and confident, like a salesman who knows you can't afford what he's offering but pitches it anyway. Lyra Voss, just the woman I wanted to see. Turning, she faced Riker, an intergalactic consultant, which was a fancy way of saying professional troublemaker. His elegant, tailored suit screamed, "Pay attention to me," and his smile was that of a predator who knew the prey had nowhere to run. "Riker," she said, feigning enthusiasm. "I'd say it's a pleasure, but we both know that's a lie," he chuckled, a sound like silk sliding over steel. "Ah, you wound me. But I hear you're in a bit of a bind, and it just so happens I might have a solution." Lyra crossed her arms. "And what's it gonna cost me? My firstborn, my dignity. Because I'm running low on both." Riker leaned in, a conspiratorial glint in his eyes. "All it'll cost you is a little faith. And maybe a favor or two down the line." "Faith," she echoed, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. "I'd rather bet on a one-legged horse, trust me," he purred. "This horse has wings." She sighed, knowing full well that trusting Riker was like trusting a fox to guard the henhouse. But with Earth on the brink, she didn't have much choice. "All right, let's hear it. How do we untangle ourselves from this cosmic mess?" Riker straightened, his demeanor all business now. "Well, it involves a bit of subterfuge, a touch of bribery, and perhaps a teeny-tiny coup. Basic Tuesday stuff." Lyra rubbed her temples. "A coup. You do realize I'm trying to prevent Earth from being labeled as galactic troublemakers, not confirm it." "True," Riker admitted. "But sometimes the best way to end a mess is to create an even bigger distraction." "Sounds like management philosophy back on Earth," she replied dryly. "Just imagine," Riker said, spreading his hands wide, "a new interstellar crisis. Something so juicy even the Flurgans and Smorfs would be too busy to bicker over fictional bears." Lyra's mind churned with possibilities, none of them good. She was standing on the precipice of madness, ready to jump because it seemed the saner option compared to the alternatives. "All right," she said finally, her voice steady. "Tell me your plan." "But if it involves talking animals, I'm out." Riker grinned, a slow, serpentine motion. "Oh, I promise it's much more complicated than that." As he laid out his scheme, Lyra realized that sometimes, to save the world, you might just have to double down on the absurdity. She listened, nodding occasionally, her mind a whirlwind of doubts and sarcastic asides. When he finished, she shook her head. "I'm either going to save Earth or be remembered as the biggest fool in history. Let's make it the first, shall we?" Riker said, extending his hand. Lyra hesitated, then clasped it. His grip was firm, reassuring. They both knew it was a devil's bargain, but sometimes, when the universe throws you lemons, you lob them back and hope to hit a god. As she left the chamber, Lyra couldn't help but wonder how many shades of crazy she was about to encounter. Galactic politics was a circus, and she felt like the reluctant juggler expected to keep all the flaming torches in the air while balancing on a unicycle over a pit of sharks. And somewhere in the dark recesses of her mind, a small, defiant part of her whispered, "Bring it on." Lyra Voss slammed the door to her temporary quarters with a thud that echoed in the hollow metallic halls. It was a sound she imagined was similar to Judge Calyx's brain trying to comprehend the concept of humor. Her team was already assembled, clustered around a table cluttered with datapads and half-eaten alien pastries that looked suspiciously like neon-colored slugs. Canon Thorne, A tall, wiry engineer with a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow and a penchant for creative cursing, tossed a wrench in the air and caught it with a satisfied smirk. So he said, leaning back in his chair until it creaked ominously, "How screwed are we, Doctor?" Sierra Nix, the linguist of the team, adjusted her glasses, peering at Lyra over a stack of translation tablets like a librarian sizing up a noisy patron. "I'd say we're somewhere between catastrophic meltdown and universal exile," she said dryly. Lyra slumped into a chair, her head falling into her hands. "We've got until the end of the session to figure out how to unscrew ourselves. And I have a feeling Judge Calix isn't going to be swayed by more human nature documentaries." Sierra tapped a tablet, bringing up an image of the Zephyrans, a species that looked like someone had given Octopi a wardrobe budget and a taste for drama. "The crux of the problem lies with the Zephyrans. They misinterpreted our documentary as divine scripture. Apparently, watching a grizzly bear fish for salmon is akin to witnessing a deity perform miracles." Cannon snorted. "To be fair, bears are pretty damn majestic. But divine? That's a stretch even for the most desperate cultist," Lyra groaned. "Right. So the Zephyrans think grizzly bears are gods and we're their prophets." "Not quite," Sierra interjected. "The Zephyrans have a complex cultural belief system that reveres creatures capable of seemingly impossible feats. Their previous deities were all based on natural phenomena they couldn't explain until they met our documentaries." Cannon leaned forward, a wicked gleam in his eye. "So, we flashed them a bear catching fish, and suddenly they're building churches, temples," Sierra corrected. "And yes, they've been constructing them in the image of various earth animals. It's like a cosmic zoo-cum-church situation." Lyra sighed, rubbing her temples. "Fantastic. And here I was thinking religion was all about guilt and bad music." Cannon cracked his knuckles. "So, what's the plan? We can't exactly tell them to unbelieve their new gods." Sierra looked thoughtful, flipping through the various alien dialects on her tablet. "The Zephyrans have a concept of the Great Unraveling, an event where false beliefs are exposed and new truths are revealed. If we can convince them that their interpretation of our documentaries is an honest misunderstanding, we might instigate this great unraveling." Lyra nodded slowly. "Okay, we spin this as a cosmic mix-up. We're not blasphemers, we're just terrible filmmakers." Essentially, Sierra said, her tone arch. "We need to speak to their leaders, present evidence of how Earth's scientific expedition actions were wildly misinterpreted." Cannon scratched his head. "And how do we do that without offending them so much they declare war on us?" Again, Lyra drummed her fingers on the table, thinking. "We need to appeal to their logic. We show them the behind-the-scenes footage. The stuff that proves we're just bumbling idiots with cameras, not prophets." Sierra tapped a few buttons on her tablet, bringing up a video of a particularly clumsy camera operator falling into a river while trying to film a grizzly bear. "We've got plenty of that. Problem is, they might see it as divine comedy." Cannon chuckled. "Gods with a sense of humor. Who knew?" Lyra stood up, determination hardening her features. "All right, here's the plan. We get an audience with the Zephyrin Council, present the footage, and pray to whatever gods exist that they buy it." The team moved into action with a speed that would have impressed even the most efficient of Earth's bureaucrats. Sierra began preparing the footage, selecting clips that highlighted the sheer absurdity of human filmmaking. Cannon tinkered with the holographic projector, ensuring that their presentation wouldn't devolve into an interstellar slapstick routine. "Lyra," Sierra called, her eyes fixed on the screen, "there's something else we need to consider. The Zephyrans aren't the only species affected by our so-called divine documentaries. The Flurgans and Smorfs are also interpreting our media in bizarre ways." "Let me guess," Lyra said, exasperation coloring her voice. "One side thinks grizzly bears are harbingers of doom, and the other believes they're harbingers of a never-ending picnic close." Sierra replied with a wry smile. "The Flurgans see them as warriors of chaos, while the Smorfs view them as harbingers of peace and tranquility." Lyra rolled her eyes. "Great. We're stuck in a cosmic tug-of-war and we're the rope. Cannon looked up from his tinkering. So, we convince the Zephyrans this is all a huge misunderstanding and hope the others follow suit, Lyra nodded. That's the plan. If we can start the ball rolling with the Zephyrans, there's a chance the Flurgans and Smorfs will reconsider their interpretations as well. It's a long shot, but it's the only one we've got. A few hours later, Lyra and her team stood in the Grand Hall of the Zephyrin Council, a place that looked like a cross between an aquarium and a cathedral. The air was thick with the scent of saltwater and incense, an odd combination that tickled Lyra's nose and made her want to sneeze. The Zephyrin Council members were arranged in a semicircle, their tentacle-like appendages draped in flowing robes that shimmered with every color of the rainbow. At the center sat their leader, a being who looked like an overgrown jellyfish with an attitude problem. Ambassador Voss, the leader, intoned, their voice resonating through the chamber like the echo of a distant storm. You have requested an audience to address the divine revelations your people have shared with our kind. Lyra stepped forward, trying to project the confidence she didn't quite feel. Honorable council members, thank you for granting us this audience. We come to you today not to refute your beliefs, but to offer clarification. The chamber rustled with interest, the Zephyrans shifting in their seats like a sea of restless waves. Lyra took a deep breath, glanced at her team, and pressed a button on the holographic projector. The footage began to play, showing the behind-the-scenes chaos and hilarity of filming on Earth. From the cameraman who fell into a river to the accidental capture of a bear scratching its back against a tree, the clips painted a picture not of divine intervention, but of human ineptitude. As the images flickered across the chamber, a murmur rose among the council members. Lyra watched their reactions closely, noting the surprise, confusion, and, most importantly, the glimmer of realization in their eyes. The leader of the council raised a tentacle, the room falling silent. These revelations, they suggest an alternative interpretation of your media, one that does not align with our current beliefs. Lyra nodded eagerly. Exactly. We believe that what you perceived as divine was, in fact, a byproduct of our fascination with our planet's wildlife. Our intention was never to present these creatures as gods, but to share our wonder with the universe. Sierra stepped forward, her voice calm and steady. We understand that this may challenge your beliefs, but we hope it also opens the door to new understandings. The great unraveling, as you call it, the leader's eyes, a swirling mass of colors, fixed on Lyra. Your words carry weight, Ambassador Voss. We must consider this new perspective and its implications for our society. Cannon, ever the pragmatist, chimed in. We're not saying you can't find something valuable in our stories. Just maybe not the let's start a religion kind of value. A ripple of amusement ran through the council, the closest thing to laughter Lyra had heard from them. She allowed herself a small smile, a flicker of hope sparking in her chest. We will deliberate, the leader announced, their voice a soft rumble, and we invite you to remain as our guests while we consider the path forward. Lyra bowed, a gesture of respect she'd practiced in front of a mirror more times than she cared to admit. Thank you, Honorable Council. We appreciate your willingness to listen. As they left the chamber, Lyra felt a mixture of relief and trepidation. They'd planted the seed of doubt, but whether it would take root was still uncertain. The fate of Earth hung in the balance, and all she could do was wait. Back in their quarters, Sierra set down her tablet with a satisfied sigh. I think that went well. Cannon grinned, kicking back in his chair. Yeah, and if it doesn't, at least we've given them something to think about before they decide to smite us. Lyra chuckled, exhaustion settling over her like a heavy cloak. Let's just hope they decide to think rather than smite. The future was uncertain, a tangled web of possibilities that threatened to ensnare them at any moment. But for now, they'd done all they could. There was nothing left but to wait for the Zephyrans to reach their decision, and hope that reason would prevail over divine misinterpretation. As Lyra drifted into an uneasy sleep, she couldn't help but wonder what cosmic absurdity awaited them next. But whatever it was, she'd face it head-on, armed with nothing but sarcasm, a motley crew of misfits, and the stubborn belief that humanity wasn't quite as doomed as it sometimes seemed. Back in the temporary quarters, Lyra Voss paced the metallic corridors, her nerves jangling like a cheap wind chime in a storm. The Zephyrins were deliberating, and all she could do was wait for the verdict. It was a bit like being in detention in high school, except, with the fate of humanity resting on the line instead of just a stern talking to from the principal. Canon Thorne, sprawled out on the couch like a particularly lazy cat, glanced up from the makeshift card tower he was constructing with datapads. "You think they're gonna call us prophets or just idiots? Depends on whether they've got a sense of humor," Lyra replied, absent-mindedly running her fingers through her hair. "I'm guessing their sense of humor is about as developed as a rock's." "Hey," Cannon said, faking offense, "rocks can be hilarious if you give them a chance, Doctor." Sierra Nix sat at the table, peering over her translation tablet with the intensity of a chess grandmaster. "The Zephyrin concept of humor is complex," she stated dryly, as if discussing the weather. "More like laugh at the absurdity of existence than laugh at a good joke." "Great," Lyra muttered. "So our only hope is that they find this whole situation absurdly existential." "Works for me," Cannon said with a shrug. "Absurdity is what got us here, right? Why not let it get us out?" Before Lyra could respond, Ambassador Grug waddled into the room, a massive grin splitting his amphibian-like face. The Blarxis diplomat was always a sight, his skin a palette of shifting greens and yellows that made him look like a walking tie-dye experiment gone wrong. "Greetings." Grug boomed, his voice echoing through the metallic chamber. "I bring news." "The Zephyrins are undecided, undecided," Lyra repeated, an edge of irritation creeping into her voice. "You mean we're stuck in limbo while they figure out whether to deify us or disembowel us?" "Precisely," Grug said cheerfully, seemingly oblivious to the tension hanging in the air. "But there's a twist. The council is divided. Some believe your explanations, some think you're merely testing their faith." "Sounds about right," Cannon said, stacking another datapad onto his precarious tower. "Nothing like a good old-fashioned schism to spice up interstellar relations." Sierra glanced at Lyra, her expression unreadable. "This could work to our advantage. If we can appeal to the faction that's leaning toward reason, we might tip the balance." Lyra nodded slowly, her mind racing as she considered their options. "All right, so we focus on the ones who think we're not total crackpots. Maybe throw in a few more videos of us being human disasters. Show them we're not exactly divine material." Grug clapped his webbed hands together, his enthusiasm infectious if not slightly misplaced. "I shall arrange another meeting. The council remains open to further discourse." "Discourse," Cannon snorted, more like a cosmic episode of Let's Make a Deal. As Grug shuffled off to secure their next audience, Lyra turned to her team, determination stealing her resolve. "All right, folks, let's get our act together. We've got another round of convince the aliens we're not gods to prepare for." Sierra tapped her fingers rhythmically on the table, her mind already spinning with strategies. "We should focus on the tangible, something they can't interpret as divine intervention. Maybe some behind-the-scenes bloopers." "Oh, yeah," Cannon chimed in. "Nothing says not a god like tripping over a tripod." The team worked late into the night, compiling more footage and crafting their next presentation. They were weary, but they had purpose, a heady cocktail that kept them buoyed even as the clock ticked toward their impending doom. Finally, with the digital equivalent of duct tape and prayers, they assembled a new showcase of human clumsiness that would make even the most pious Zephyrin question their newfound theology. The next day, they returned to the Galactic Council chamber, the smell of burnt toast clinging to the air like an unwanted guest. The Zephyrins gathered once more, their expressions inscrutable behind their veil-like appendages. The leader, who Lyra had fondly dubbed Jellyfish Supreme in her head, regarded them with an unreadable gaze. "Ambassador Voss, You seek to provide further clarification, yes, Lyra said, stepping forward with more confidence than she felt. We've brought additional evidence to demonstrate that our documentaries are not divine revelations, but the work of our planet's finest blunderers. Cannon activated the projector, and the room filled with the staggering ineptitude of humanity at its finest. There was the camera operator falling into the river again, clearly a fan favorite, followed by a series of mishaps involving misplaced lenses, accidental nudity quickly censored, and a director who'd forgotten to turn the mic on. The Zephyrans watched in silent contemplation, their eyes not leaving the screen until the last frame faded to black. The tension in the room was palpable, thick enough to slice with a butter knife. Finally, Jellyfish Supreme spoke. These images, they show a different side to your people, one of imperfection. Lyra seized on the opening, her voice steady and earnest. Yes, exactly. Imperfection is at the core of our being. We're not infallible, far from it. And that's what makes us human, just like your people are uniquely Zephyran. A murmur rippled through the council, the division among them becoming more evident as some nodded slowly, while others remained stiff and skeptical. Lyra watched them carefully, sensing the growing rift and wondering how best to exploit it. Judge Calix, a figure who'd thus far remained silent, suddenly leaned forward. Calix's voice, with its odd blend of curiosity and skepticism, cut through the chamber like a scalpel. And what of those who believe in the truth of your visions? Do you deny them? Sierra, quick as ever, responded before Lyra could even open her mouth. We don't deny anyone the right to believe, but we offer context. The truth is complex, multifaceted. There's value in different perspectives, but they must be informed perspectives. Cannon smirked, adding, we're just saying if you want to worship something, maybe a bear doing a back scratch, isn't it? To Lyra's surprise, a soft ripple of laughter moved through the room. It was subtle, like the first drops of rain before a storm, but it was there. A good sign, she hoped. A sign that these alien beings, for all their differences, might just appreciate the absurdity of it all. Jellyfish Supreme raised a tentacle, calling for silence. We will consider this new evidence carefully. The division among our kind is significant, and we must approach it with caution. Lyra inclined her head in acknowledgement, masking her anxiety behind a carefully maintained veneer of poise. We're grateful for your willingness to engage with us and consider our perspective. As the meeting adjourned, Lyra felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't much, just a small flame in the overwhelming darkness of their predicament, but it was enough to keep her going. Back in their quarters, Cannon was practically buzzing with adrenaline. Did you see them? They were actually laughing. Or whatever their equivalent of laughing is, Sierra nodded, a rare smile playing at the corners of her lips. I think they're beginning to understand. Or at least, they're beginning to doubt their initial interpretation. Lyra collapsed onto the couch, exhaustion tugging at her limbs. We've given them something to chew on, at least. Now we just have to hope it doesn't give them indigestion, or spark an all-out theological war, Cannon added with a wry grin. The team exchanged weary smiles, the camaraderie among them a balm against the uncertainty they faced. They were in this together, a motley crew of misfits standing against the cosmic absurdity of it all. As the day turned to night, Lyra found herself staring out the small viewport, her mind a whirl of thoughts. The galaxy was vast and indifferent, a swirling mass of stars and planets that cared little for the tiny dramas of one species. But here they were, trying to navigate the chaos, armed with nothing but their wits and an abundance of sarcasm. Hey, Cannon said, breaking into her reverie, think we'll get through this intact? Lyra glanced at him, a smile tugging at her lips despite herself. If we don't, at least we'll go down in history as the least effective prophets the universe has ever seen. Cannon chuckled. I'll drink to that. And to the hope that maybe, just maybe, reason will win out over ridiculousness. Here's hoping, Lyra agreed, raising an imaginary glass. To reason and to not getting smote. With that she leaned back, allowing herself a brief moment of respite. The battle was far from over, but they'd made progress. And in a universe that thrived on chaos, sometimes progress was the best you could hope for. Lyra Voss was pacing the temporary quarters like a caged animal, the metallic floor echoing each step she took. The air was thick with tension, the kind that clung to your skin like humidity but smelled faintly of desperation and burnt toast, thanks to the Galactic Council chamber next door. Oh, and self-importance. Couldn't forget that whiff of arrogance that hung in the air like an overachieving perfume. She was trying to ignore the palpable sense of doom hanging over Earth like a guillotine ready to drop. Undecided, they said, she muttered to herself, kicking at a stray cable. More like we're flipping a coin and hoping it lands upright. Across the room, Canon Thorne was busy stacking datapads into a structure that looked like it would collapse if someone even thought about sneezing near it. His laid-back demeanor was infuriatingly calm, like a man oblivious to the fact that the universe could be about to hit the cosmic reset button on his entire species. Got to admire their decisiveness, Canon said, not looking up from his precarious endeavor. Who knew gods could be so flippant? Gods. Please, Lyra snorted. We're one bad comedic sketch away from being space dust. The door slid open with a smooth hiss, and in waddled Ambassador Grug, looking every bit the part of an overly enthusiastic amphibian diplomat trying his best to mimic an Earth politician, complete with a broad grin that never quite reached his eyes. His skin was a kaleidoscope of greens and yellows, shifting like an ocean during a storm. Good news, he bellowed, practically vibrating with misplaced optimism. The Zephyrans are still considering your fate. Considering. More like they're deciding whether to frame us or fry us, Sierra Nix said dryly. She was hunched over her translation tablet, her fingers dancing over the screen with the frantic energy of someone trying to defuse a bomb with a blindfold on. Yes, well, the traditionalists, they're escalating their demands, Grug continued, oblivious to Sierra's sarcasm. They feel threatened by the new beliefs and are pushing for more drastic measures. Drastic measures, huh? Cannon finally looked up, his tower of datapads swaying ominously. Can't wait to see their version of drastic, maybe a strongly worded letter, more like a strongly worded orbital bombardment, Lyra muttered, rubbing her temples. We need a plan, something that shows we're not a threat without them twisting it into a cosmic game of telephone. Cannon snapped his fingers. Actually, I've got an idea. Should we be worried or excited? Sierra asked, raising an eyebrow. Both probably, Cannon grinned, shifting the datapads aside. We show them our true intentions using technology, but there's a risk they might see it as a further offense. I say we hear him out, Lyra decided, folding her arms. It's not like we have a wealth of options here. Cannon leaned forward, eyes twinkling with mischief. All right, so we put together a virtual reality experience. Something that lets them literally walk a mile in our shoes, or float in zero-G, whatever works. We give them a first-hand look at how chaotic and utterly non-divine we are. Sierra looked intrigued. VR could work, but the risk is them seeing it as us trying to manipulate their perceptions. You know, like brainwashing. Yeah, well, they already think a documentary about grizzly bears is holy scripture, so I'm not sure their perception is the sharpest tool in the shed, Cannon shot back. Lyra chewed her lip, considering. Could we tailor it to highlight our flaws, show them the mundane, the ridiculous? The humanity. Nothing says not a god like showing them our failed attempts at assembling flat-pack furniture, Cannon agreed. Grug clapped his hands, the webbed sound like a wet towel hitting tile. This could work, I shall arrange a presentation. Great, Lyra sighed. Now we just need to not screw it up. As Grug shuffled out, Lyra turned to her team, a determined glint in her eyes. Let's get to work. We've got a universe to disappoint. They spent the next few hours cobbling together the VR experience, a bizarre blend of Earth's greatest non-achievements, complete with bloopers, outtakes, and the occasional clip of a cat attempting to be a majestic hunter, only to fall spectacularly off a couch. It was a masterpiece of mediocrity, and Lyra couldn't help but feel a strange sense of pride in their utter lack of grandeur. Maybe, just maybe, it would keep them alive. The following day, they found themselves back in the Galactic Council chamber, the air still thick with the smell of overcooked ambition. The Zephyrins watched them with eyes like black holes, absorbing everything and giving nothing back. Ambassador Voss, Jellyfish Supreme intoned, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floor. "You wish to present further evidence?" "Yes," Lyra replied, her voice steady. "We've prepared a virtual reality experience to offer you a glimpse into our world. A world of imperfection, of mistakes, and of humanity." Cannon activated the device, and the room was filled with an immersive display of Earth's finest blunders. There was the classic footage of a human slipping on ice, a montage of failed cooking attempts ending in small-scale culinary disasters, and a recurring clip of a dog chasing its own tail to the point of exhaustion. The Zephyrins watched in silence, their expressions inscrutable, but every so often a tentacle would twitch or an eye would widen, suggesting some level of engagement. Lyra held her breath, waiting for the verdict that could mean salvation or annihilation, her heart pounding in her chest like a drumbeat of doom. Finally, Jellyfish Supreme spoke, his voice resonating with a gravity that made Lyra's nerves dance a jig of anxiety. "Your demonstration is intriguing. Intriguing good or intriguing we're about to be accidentally divine again," Cannon quipped, unable to help himself. "Intriguing enough to warrant further discussion," the leader continued, ignoring Cannon's remark. "The traditionalists demand harsher penalties, but there are those among us who see merit in your presentation." Lyra's heart lifted, just a fraction. "We appreciate your willingness to consider our perspective." Judge Calix, who'd been silently observing, leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "Your demonstration raises questions about the nature of divinity itself. What if imperfection is part of the divine?" Sierra, ever quick on the uptake, jumped in. "That's precisely our point. Divinity, or what you perceive as divinity, is subjective. Our flaws, our failures, they define us as much as our successes." A murmur rippled through the council, the tension in the room a living thing, pulsing with possibility and peril. Jellyfish Supreme raised a tentacle, signaling for order. "We will deliberate further. Your fate hangs in the balance." With that, the council was dismissed and the humans retreated, the weight of uncertainty pressing down on them. Back in their quarters, the team was buzzing with nervous energy. "Do you think it worked?" Sierra asked, her voice tinged with hope and doubt in equal measure. "It's hard to say," Lyra admitted, pacing once more. "But we've given them something to think about." "I'd call that a win," Cannon said, plopping down on the couch. "Nothing like sowing the seeds of existential doubt to keep the peace." Grug reappeared, his enthusiasm undimmed by the tense atmosphere. "There is still much to be discussed. The traditionalists are not pleased, but you have opened a dialogue." "Dialogue," Sierra echoed. "Isn't that just a fancy word for arguing with more steps?" "Exactly." Grug beamed, clearly missing the sarcasm in Sierra's words. Lyra rolled her eyes but couldn't help the small smile that tugged at her lips. "We're not out of the woods yet, but at least we've got a map now." Cannon stretched, yawning exaggeratedly. "I say we get some rest before the next round of guests that divine intent." They settled in for the night, each lost in their own thoughts, the looming threat of oblivion a constant companion. As Lyra lay staring at the ceiling, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the edge of something monumental. Whether it was their salvation or their undoing, she didn't know, but one thing was certain: whatever happened next, they'd face it together. And in a universe of uncertainty, that was perhaps the only certainty they could count on. Cannon's supposed masterstroke, the VR demonstration, was about as successful as a chocolate teapot in a supernova. Barely had they left the council chamber when it became glaringly apparent that the Zephyrins saw the whole spectacle as a charade, an elaborate human trick to pull cosmic wool over their many eyes. The irony. Our attempt to prove we weren't divine ended up looking like the deities of incompetence trying to pull a fast one. The mood in the temporary quarters was about as cheery as a wake on a rainy day. Lyra paced back and forth like a caged predator, each step a silent curse directed at the universe's sense of humor. "Well, that went to hell in a handbasket," Lyra muttered, her voice dripping with frustration. "Thanks to Cannon, we're about 2 seconds from being vaporized." Cannon leaned back against the wall, unruffled, a picture of calm in the eye of the storm. "You say vaporized, I say misunderstood." Tomato, tomato. Sierra didn't look up from her translation tablet, her fingers flying over the screen with the precision of a concert pianist. "The traditionalists are pushing for harsher penalties, probably involving things with spikes and lasers. You know, the usual intergalactic diplomacy." Ambassador Grug's entrance was heralded by the sound of his webbed feet slapping against the floor, a watery accompaniment to Lyra's relentless pacing. His colors had shifted to a nervous shade of aquamarine, a mood ring for bureaucratic disasters. "The council found your demonstration unconvincing," he croaked, sounding like a frog with stage fright. "They believe it was an attempt at subterfuge." "Subterfuge," Cannon repeated, savoring the word like a connoisseur of verbal disaster. "Because nothing says deceit like a montage of people slipping on banana peels." "There's nothing funny about slipping," Judge Calix piped up, floating through the doorway with all the gravitas of a judge presiding over a kindergarten talent show. He still hadn't grasped the finer points of humor, but he was getting there, slowly, at the pace of molasses in a vacuum. Lyra stopped her pacing to face the group, her expression one of those rally-the-troops looks that usually preceded a grand speech or, in their case, a renewed determination to avoid becoming cosmic dust. "All right, folks, we're not done yet. We need a new plan, one that doesn't involve accidentally convincing the universe we're diabolical masterminds." Sierra sighed, rubbing her temples in a futile attempt to stave off the headache threatening to split her skull. "Maybe we need to go back to basics, show them we're as mundane and ordinary as possible. Like broadcasting Earth's traffic jams live," Cannon suggested, smirking. "Or maybe the endless bureaucratic hell of renewing a passport." Grug blinked, his skin shifting to a contemplative mauve. "Or food. Food is universal. We could show them what you consume. Perhaps a sampling of human cuisine." "Food," Lyra repeated, a dubious note in her voice. "The fate of humanity hanging on a plate of spaghetti and meatballs." "I can't decide if that's brilliant or absurd." "Both," Cannon declared, arms folded across his chest. "But it might just work. I mean, who doesn't love a good lasagna, except maybe lactose-intolerant aliens? We could highlight cultural diversity through cuisine," Sierra added, warming to the idea. "Show them how different regions of Earth have distinct foods, how we come together over a meal." Lyra's eyes glinted with a spark of hope amidst the gloom. "All right, let's make this work. Time to cook up a peace offering." Grug beamed, his skin a confident emerald. "I shall arrange for the necessary provisions." "The council is adjourned until tomorrow. We have until then to prepare." Lyra nodded, the gears of her mind spinning at full throttle, fueled by a blend of desperation and determination. "Let's get cracking. The universe waits for no one, and neither do the Zephyrins." The next few hours were a flurry of chaotic activity, a culinary whirlwind that threatened to become a literal storm as the team tried their hand at various dishes. With ingredients sourced from across the galaxy, a little of this, a dash of that, they crafted a menu that was part cultural showcase, part desperate plea for clemency. Cannon, ever the opportunist, took it upon himself to craft the piece de resistance, a towering cake that was more architectural marvel than dessert. If they don't like the taste, maybe they'll appreciate the engineering. Or just see it as another attempt to trick them, Sierra quipped, elbow deep in a bowl of alien greens that smelled suspiciously like regret. Lyra oversaw the operation like a general in a war zone, barking orders and mixing ingredients with the precision of a mad scientist. "Make sure everything is labeled. We don't want someone mistaking wasabi for avocado. Grug, despite his lack of hands, managed to prep a salad with surprising dexterity, his colors shifting to an optimistic turquoise. I've always said diplomacy is as much about the stomach as it is the mind. Then let's hope these guys aren't on a low-carb diet, Cannon remarked, stacking the cake layers with a flourish. As the evening wore on, the team gathered around the makeshift banquet table, surveying their handiwork with a blend of pride and trepidation. It was a feast fit for a king, or in their case, a council of potentially hostile aliens. The next day came too soon, the Iors melting away like a snowflake in a sunstorm. As they entered the Galactic Council chamber, the weight of their culinary gamble pressed down on them like a supermassive black hole. The Zephyrans were already assembled, their expressions unreadable, though Lyra swore she saw a hint of curiosity in the way some of them leaned forward, the way an olfactory tentacle twitched here and there. Jellyfish Supreme regarded them with that inscrutable gaze, a cosmic poker face that betrayed nothing. "You wish to present nourishment?" "Exactly," Lyra affirmed, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who had nothing left to lose. "A taste of humanity." Cannon unveiled the feast with a dramatic flourish, the table laden with a spread of vibrant dishes, each more colorful and aromatic than the last. "Bon appetit," he declared with a grin that spoke of both confidence and impending disaster. For a moment there was silence, the kind that stretched into eternity and back again. Then slowly the Zephyrans began to sample the offerings, their reactions ranging from cautious curiosity to what Lyra hoped was a nod of approval. The room buzzed with a low hum of conversation, the tension easing just a fraction as the Zephyrans engaged with the meal. It was, Lyra realized, an opportunity, a fragile thread of hope dangling over the abyss. But just as the atmosphere began to shift, a commotion erupted at the far end of the table. One of the Zephyrans, a traditionalist with a penchant for drama, had bitten into a particularly potent pepper, his face contorting into an impressive array of colors that could only be described as an interstellar light show. His reaction was explosive, a cascade of incomprehensible words that needed no translation to convey his displeasure. The room fell silent, the air thick with the threat of impending doom. "Well," Cannon whispered, his voice barely audible over the chaos, "at least we know they have taste receptors." Lyra resisted the urge to facepalm, her mind racing for a way to salvage the situation. "We need to do something, and fast." Sierra's voice cut through the panic like a laser through butter. "Humor. The absurdity of existence, remember. Let's give them a reason to laugh." The team exchanged glances, a silent agreement passing between them. It was crazy, but then, wasn't everything they'd done just a touch mad? Cannon slipped into action, grabbing a small, innocent-looking pastry and feigning an exaggerated reaction to its non-existent heat. His performance was over the top, a comedic display that would have made a silent movie star proud. To their collective astonishment, a ripple of amusement passed through the Zephyrin ranks, a soft murmur of laughter that grew into a wave. It was the strangest sound, like a symphony of crickets performing opera. Jellyfish Supreme raised a tentacle, and the room quieted once more, the council leader's gaze resting on the humans with something that might have been respect, or maybe indigestion. "Your presentation was unique," Cannon bowed with a flourish, ever the showman. "We aim to please." Lyra stepped forward, her voice steady. "We know we're not perfect, but we hope you can see we're not malevolent either. Just a bunch of flawed beings trying to make our way in the universe." The council conferred, the air thick with tension and the lingering scent of spices. Finally, Jellyfish Supreme spoke, his voice a low rumble that resonated through the chamber. "We will reconvene tomorrow. Your fate remains undecided." As they retreated from the chamber, the weight of uncertainty still hanging over them, Lyra let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The setback had been monumental, but they hadn't given up. Not yet. Back in their quarters, the team gathered once more, the adrenaline of their near-miss fading into exhaustion. That was a close one, Sierra remarked, collapsing into a chair, her translation tablet forgotten for the moment. But we're still in the game, Cannon pointed out, his usual bravado tinged with a rare seriousness. That's something. Grug's skin shimmered with weary relief, his colors settling into a tranquil teal. Your determination is admirable. The council is divided, but you have given them much to consider. Lyra nodded, her resolve hardening like reinforced steel. We've got one more chance to make this right. We need to pull out all the stops, leave nothing on the table. Sierra leaned forward, her gaze steely. We need to find common ground. Something that speaks to them on their level. Humor got their attention, Cannon mused, his eyes gleaming with the spark of an idea. Maybe we need to focus on that, use it to bridge the gap. And how exactly do we do that? Lyra asked, her skepticism tempered by hope. Cannon grinned, that mischievous glint back in his eyes. We show them what humor really means to us. The laughter, the absurdity, the humanity. Lyra considered the proposal, her mind racing through the possibilities. It was a gamble, but then they'd been gambling since this all began. All right, she agreed, her voice firm. Let's do it. We've got one last shot to prove we're worth saving. Let's make it count. With renewed purpose, the team set to work, determined to turn the tide in their favor. They had a universe to convince, and time was running out. But if there was one thing humanity was known for, it was their stubborn refusal to give up in the face of insurmountable odds. And in a galaxy teetering on the edge, that might just be enough. So, remind me why we're trying to make these gelatinous gods laugh again, Cannon asked, leaning against a table that was still sticky from their culinary escapades. Because I'm all for humor, but our last comedy bit nearly got us skewered. Lyra sighed, rubbing her temples as if that would somehow massage away the existential dread hanging over them like a bad smell in a confined space. Because humor is universal, or at least that's the theory we're betting the fate of humanity on. Grug, now a rather contemplative shade of mauve, piped up in his usual soothing tones. And it appears to be our best chance of appealing to the councils. Lighter sighed. Assuming they have one, Cannon muttered, stacking his datapads into another precarious tower, because apparently he hadn't learned anything from their last brush with doom. Dr. Sierra Nix was hunched over her translation tablet, the screen reflecting an array of symbols that looked more like squashed insects than anything remotely understandable. Ancient Earth diplomacy often involved cultural exchanges, you know, she said, not looking up from her work. Exchanging knowledge, sharing arts. Maybe that's what we need to do here, Lyra perked up. Like what exactly? They're not going to be impressed by our attempts at interpretive dance, that's for sure. Sierra shrugged, her fingers flying over the tablet. I dunno, maybe music or storytelling. Something that shows them we're not just interplanetary clowns juggling for their amusement. Or inciting a galactic food fight, Cannon added with a grin, clearly still proud of their impromptu comedy act. Lyra shot him a look that could shatter glass. That's one way to describe nearly getting us vaporized. Sierra finally looked up, her expression one of determination mingled with exasperation. Listen, we're running out of time. If we don't show them something new, something that illustrates our depth beyond a culinary disaster, we're done for. So, what then? Show them the gospel of the grizzly bear part 2, Cannon suggested, snark dripping from his words like oil from a leaky engine. Maybe not another documentary, Sierra said, flipping through files on her tablet, but I think we've all underestimated the power of a good story. We tell them a tale, something that encapsulates the human experience, our triumphs, our tragedies. Lyra chuckled darkly. You mean like how we always manage to screw up even the simplest things but still somehow muddle through? Exactly, Sierra replied with a grin that bordered on maniacal. Like how we can relate to the absurdity of existence. She gestured at the hodgepodge of ingredients still strewn about, an impromptu metaphor for their current predicaments. Ambassador Grug's skin shifted to an encouraging aquamarine, a hopeful sign amidst the chaos. I can assist with the narrative delivery. My people have a long tradition of dramatic storytelling. Cannon raised an eyebrow. as long as it doesn't involve interpretive dance. Grug emitted a sound that was probably laughter, though it could easily have been a hiccup. I assure you, our stories are much more eloquent. All right, let's do this, Lyra said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who's just realized they've decided to fight a bear with a spoon. Sierra, you'll handle the story. Grug, you can add your own flair. Cannon, try not to make any more towers, please. We've had enough collapses for a lifetime. As they debated and planned, the minutes slipped away faster than a politician's promises. The appointed hour drew near. Another chance to tip the scales, this time with words and not food. The Galactic Council chamber was foreboding as ever, the kind of place that made you want to confess to crimes you hadn't committed just to fill the silence. The Zephyrans gathered once more, their fluid forms shifting in a way that might have been anticipation or just indigestion from the previous day's meal. Lyra took a deep breath, the metallic taste of recycled air on her tongue as she stepped up. "Esteemed members of the council," she began, her voice steady, "we'd like to share with you a story." Jellyfish Supreme inclined slightly, whether in acknowledgement or just boredom was anyone's guess. "Proceed." Sierra took the lead, her voice weaving a tale that spanned the breadth of human experience. She spoke of discovery and loss, of dreams dashed and rebuilt. It was a story of resilience, of laughter found amidst the rubble of failure, of humanity's greatest strength, their unyielding spirit. Grug added his own embellishments, his colors shifting to match the mood of each scene. His dramatics lent an alien authenticity to the narrative, a bridge between cultures that had previously seemed impossible. Cannon, ever the opportunist, threw in the occasional quip, earning a few surprised ripples of amusement from the crowd. It was a performance that danced on the edge of chaos, like everything else they'd done so far. As they reached the climax, the room was silent, save for the occasional bizarre noise from the Zephyrans that might have been their version of an applause. When they finished, the silence was deafening, stretching out until Lyra was sure she could hear her own heartbeat. Jellyfish Supreme's gaze was unyielding, but there was a glimmer of something, perhaps understanding. "Your story was enlightening." Cannon exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Well, glad some of us were enlightened." Lyra shot him another glare, but there was no bite behind it this time, only the shared relief of a near disaster averted. The council conferred once more, their deliberations a low hum of alien discourse. The humans waited, nerves stretched to the breaking point, until Jellyfish Supreme finally turned back to them. "We will consider your words," he said, his voice resonating through the chamber like the toll of a benevolent bell. "Return tomorrow for our decision." As they left the chamber, the weight of uncertainty still perched heavily on their shoulders. Lyra allowed herself a small, fleeting smile. It wasn't a victory, not yet, but it was a step in the right direction. "Hope this gamble pays off," Sierra mused, her eyes thoughtful as they walked back to their temporary quarters. Cannon shrugged, his typical swagger back in full force. "Hey, sometimes it's the long shots that pay off the biggest." Lyra nodded, her resolve solidifying with each step. "We've done everything we can. Now it's up to the council." Back in their quarters, the team settled into a weary silence, the adrenaline of their performance giving way to exhaustion. But beneath it all was a flicker of hope, a fragile flame that refused to be snuffed out by the galactic winds of doubt. Sierra set down her tablet, a small smile playing at the corners of her lips. "You know, for a bunch of misfit humans, we didn't do half bad." Cannon grinned, leaning back and propping his feet up on the table. "Damn straight. We may not be perfect, but we're nothing if not persistent." Grug's colors were a tranquil blend of blues and greens, a visual sigh of relief. "Your persistence is admirable. Regardless of the outcome, you have shown great courage." Lyra chuckled, a sound that was equal parts weary and amused. "Courage or stupidity. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference." "Maybe a bit of both," Sierra said, her voice laced with wry humor. "But isn't that just the human way?" "That it is," Cannon agreed, raising an imaginary glass in a toast. To humanity, may our jokes land, our stories inspire, and our desserts never cause a diplomatic incident again. Lyra joined in the mock toast, her own smile genuine for the first time in days. To humanity, she echoed, the words a promise, a challenge, and most importantly, a hope. And as they settled in for yet another sleepless night, their minds racing with possibilities and fears, one thing was clear. They were in this together, come hell or high gravity. Humanity's fate hung in the balance, and they were determined to see it through to the bitter end, with humor, resilience, and the sheer stubbornness that had brought them this far. The Galactic Council chamber was as welcoming as a dentist's waiting room, complete with the same sense of impending doom. Judge Calix sat at the far end, looking like he'd swallowed a lemon and enjoyed it. The room was filled with zephyrins, their gelatinous forms shifting in colors that ranged from jaded beige to skeptical gray. Lyra Voss, Canon Thorne, Dr. Sierra Nix, and Ambassador Grug stood at the center, feeling as out of place as a steak at a vegan convention. Let's hope this cultural exchange doesn't end with us skewered on their spikes of diplomacy, Canon muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra snorted, her nerves getting the better of her. If we do, maybe they'll at least let us pick the spikes. I hear obsidian is quite fashionable this season. Sierra, ever the multitasker, was fiddling with her translation tablet, no doubt ensuring there were no mistakes in their presentation. Remember, she said, her voice holding the kind of patience reserved for explaining things to toddlers or politicians. This is about showing them we're more than just walking, talking comedy routines. Well, I do fancy myself a bit of a storyteller, Grug added, his skin a soothing aquamarine. And today, we weave a tale of humanity's heart and soul. Heart, soul, and the occasional pratfall, Canon quipped, earning a snort from Lyra. As they prepared, the Zephyrin Council murmured amongst themselves, their gelatinous surfaces rippling like a pond disturbed by pebbles of discontent. The tension in the room was palpable, like someone had cranked up gravity just for kicks. Jellyfish Supreme, who seemed to embody the collective wisdom or at least the collective ennui of the Zephyrins, floated forward. You may begin your cultural exchange, it intoned, voice oozing with the kind of gravitas usually reserved for God-voiced narrators in epic films. Lyra stepped forward, clearing her throat. Esteemed members of the council, today we present to you a story. A story of what it means to be human. A story that reveals not just our follies but our resilience. Sierra took over, speaking with a rhythm that was both familiar and foreign, her words translated into the Zephyrin tongue by the tablet's shimmering screen. Our story begins with hardship, as many do, a world in peril, as many are, but more than that, it's a story of hope. How, despite the odds, we persevere. Grug's color shifted subtly, adding an ethereal undertone to Sierra's narration. You see, even in the darkest of times, we humans find light. We find laughter. We find the strength to dance on the edge of chaos. And sometimes we just dance because we're terrible at marching, Canon interjected, earning a ripple of amusement that spread through the council like a low-grade infection. We've brought with us an ancient earth tale, Sierra continued, one that showcases the resilience of human spirit. Something that illustrates who we are, beyond the documentaries and misunderstandings. The story unfolded, weaving a tapestry, not that anyone would dare use that word, of human experience. There were tales of explorers who ventured into the unknown, driven by curiosity rather than conquest. Stories of artists who painted dreams into being, of scientists who tore down the walls of ignorance with the wrecking ball of discovery. Grug's contributions added a layer of dramatic flair, his species' innate storytelling prowess lending a certain gravitas that earthly narrators often lacked. His hues shifted in harmony with the emotional peaks and valleys of the tale, a kaleidoscope of empathy that bridged the cultural chasm. There was a moment, near the story's end, where silence reigned supreme. It was the kind of silence that wasn't just the absence of sound, but the presence of anticipation. The air seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next note in a symphony of suspense. And that, Sierra concluded, is humanity. We stumble, we fall, but we rise again, laughing in the face of adversity, sometimes because it's all we can do. For a long moment, the only sound was the soft, rhythmic pulsing of the zephyrins as they processed the story. It was a silence heavy with possibilities, like a freshly opened book begging you to turn the page. Judge Calix finally spoke, his voice rich with the authority of a man who could sentence you to death or invite you to dinner with the same tone. Your story is intriguing. Intriguing, Lyra repeated, tasting the word like a delicacy she wasn't sure was meant to be savored or feared. It shows a depth of character we had not anticipated, Calix continued, his gaze sweeping over them with a mix of curiosity and something else, something that might just have been respect. Cannon, never one to miss a beat, leaned in closer, his voice a conspiratorial whisper. Does this mean you'll cancel the spikes and lasers package? A ripple of genuine amusement ran through the council, a sound like water burbling over stones. Jellyfish Supreme, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke. It seems we have much to learn from each other. The room seemed to collectively exhale, the tension dissipating like a bad smell caught in a breeze. Lyra couldn't help the small smile that tugged at her lips, relief flooding her system faster than the realization that they might actually pull this off. Cannon grinned, his trademark cockiness on full display. I think that means we're off the hook. For now, Sierra cautioned, though her eyes sparkled with hope. But remember, this is just the beginning. We have to continue building this bridge. Agreed, Lyra said, her voice firm. This isn't just about saving our skins. It's about making sure something like this doesn't happen again. Grug's skin radiated a serene blend of colors, a visual testament to the newfound understanding. Your willingness to share, to open yourselves up to us, speaks volumes. Yeah, well, we humans never did know when to shut up, Cannon quipped, his irreverence a comforting constant in a universe that often seemed intent on keeping everyone guessing. Judge Calix nodded, a slow, deliberate gesture that conveyed 1,000 unspoken words. We will deliberate on this further. But know that your openness is appreciated. With that, the council began to disperse, a tide of gelatinous forms retreating to the recesses of their curious architecture. The audience was over, but the real work had just begun. As they exited the chamber, Lyra let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Well, that went better than expected. No lasers, no spikes. Yeah, unless they're planning a surprise party, Cannon joked, though the tension in his body belied his casual tone. Sierra, ever the voice of reason, shook her head. I don't think they are the surprise party type, but we need to stay vigilant. This is just the start. Right, Lyra agreed, her mind already racing with the implications of their successful presentation. We've got to keep the momentum going. They returned to their temporary quarters, where the atmosphere was markedly lighter. Their earlier apprehension had given way to cautious optimism, the kind that made you think maybe, just maybe, things could turn out all right. Grug, his colors a gentle cascade of hopeful hues, spoke up. I must commend you all. Your resilience and humor have made a significant impact. Cannon waved a hand dismissively, though he couldn't quite hide his grin. We just do what we do best. Talk a lot and hope for the best. And occasionally save the galaxy while we're at it, Lyra added, her sarcasm tinged with a note of pride. Let's hope this is the first step towards a more harmonious future, Sierra said, her voice a mix of hope and determination. As they settled into their surroundings, the weight of the day's events began to lift, replaced by a sense of camaraderie and possibility. For the first time in what felt like eons, the galaxy didn't seem quite so hostile. To cultural exchanges, Cannon said, raising an imaginary glass once more. And to not getting vaporized, Lyra added, clinking her own invisible drink against his. Sierra chuckled, joining in the mock toast. To humanity's enduring spirit. Grug, his colors a celebration of unity, chimed in. and to the bonds we've begun to forge." As they toasted, the mood was one of triumph, not the loud, boisterous kind, but the quiet, resilient triumph of those who had faced the storm and come out the other side, albeit a little soggy. Eventually, the conversation drifted to lighter topics, their laughter a soothing balm for the frayed nerves that had accompanied them throughout their journey. The darkness of the universe outside their window seemed a little less daunting now, the pinpricks of starlight holding promises rather than threats. As the night wore on, fatigue began to set in, the adrenaline that had kept them going finally ebbing away. But in its place, there was something far more enduring: hope. Lyra stretched, a yawn escaping her lips as she looked around at her companions. "I guess we should get some rest. Tomorrow's a new day, and who knows what it'll bring. More diplomatic crises, probably," Cannon said with a smirk, earning a playful shove from Lyra. "Whatever comes," Sierra said, her eyes meeting each of theirs in turn, "we'll face it together." Grug nodded, his colors a gentle affirmation of their unity. Together, and as they settled in for another night under the uncaring gaze of the cosmos, they did so with the knowledge that they had not just survived, but had taken a step towards understanding, towards unity, and maybe even towards peace. For now, that was enough. And in the vast, unforgiving expanse of the galaxy, maybe it was all they could ask for. The temporary quarters were anything but inviting, a cramped space with the charm of a prison cell, with a slightly better color scheme. The team lounged around what passed for a table, a lopsided slab of some material that looked suspiciously like recycled plastic waste. Lyra Voss, feeling as out of place as a cow on an ice rink, leaned back, legs propped up on the table, and tried to ignore the whirring sound coming from the ventilation. "Well," she began, with the air of someone who had just dodged a bullet, or a laser in this case, "that was a thing." Canon Thorne grinned, fiddling with a datapad that seemed more interested in crashing than in organizing his diplomatic notes. "A resounding success, no less. We survived without getting skewered or vaporized. I call that a win." Lyra chuckled, a sound that carried more relief than joy. "I was half expecting our esteemed Judge Calix to turn us into interstellar barbecue." "Judge Lemonface?" Cannon laughed. "Nah, I think he secretly loves us, or at least tolerates us, which is as close as we get in this galaxy. Doctor." Sierra Nix, who had been tapping away at her translation tablet with the intensity of a scientist diffusing a bomb, chimed in. "Let's not get carried away. We've still got a lot of work ahead." "True," Lyra agreed, though her tone was light. "But I think we've at least proven we're not the harbingers of doom they thought we were." Grug, the ambassador with aquamarine skin that seemed to dance with colors when he was particularly contemplative, nodded. "Your presentation effectively conveyed the complexity of human nature. It was eye-opening." "Well, humans are a mixed bag," Lyra admitted. "Mostly full of nuts," Cannon snorted. "Speak for yourself." "I'm more of a fruit salad." Sierra rolled her eyes but couldn't suppress a small grin. "Fruits, nuts, whatever, as long as we don't end up on someone's menu." Grug's skin shimmered in agreement. "Humor truly is the universal language. Your ability to laugh at your own absurdity resonated with the council." "Yeah, well, laughing at ourselves is kind of our thing," Lyra said. "That and getting into trouble. And then laughing at that trouble," Cannon added. The mood in the room was lighter, though not quite jubilant. There was still the looming shadow of uncertainty hanging over them, the kind that made you feel like you'd narrowly avoided stepping into a pit of despair but might still topple in if you weren't careful. "So, what's next?" Lyra asked, directing her question to the room but mostly to herself. "We can't just sit around and wait for them to decide our fate." Sierra adjusted her glasses, a gesture that seemed more out of habit than necessity. "We're going to have to engage in more cultural exchanges, prove that we're not just capable of comedy but of contributing to the galaxy in meaningful ways." Cannon raised an eyebrow. "Meaningful, huh? Do we have to?" "Yes, we do," Sierra said firmly. "And we need to get other species on our side too, convince them that we're worth keeping around. We're like space salesmen," Lyra mused. Only instead of selling vacuum cleaners, we're selling ourselves. More like selling the idea of not being obliterated, Cannon corrected. A tough sell, but I'm confident in our product. Grug's soothing voice broke through the banter. The Zephyrans were not the only ones impacted by your presentation. Others were watching. They are curious. Lyra nodded, her expression thoughtful. Curiosity is good. Curiosity means they are willing to listen. We'll have to reach out, Sierra said. Start with the species that are open to dialogue. Build alliances. Cannon made a face. More diplomatic dinners. I was hoping to avoid another round of fermented algae surprise. Consider it a perk of the job, Lyra said dryly. At least it's not spikes and lasers. Yet, Cannon muttered. The door to their quarters hissed open, and Jellyfish Supreme glided in, its form a floating mass of gelatinous wisdom, or ennui, depending on its mood. The room fell silent, an awkward hush descending as everyone waited for it to speak. We have discussed your proposal, it said, its tones as soothing as a lullaby. The council is intrigued by the idea of further cultural exchange. Lyra exchanged a glance with Cannon, both of them trying to keep their expressions neutral. Intrigued was better than incinerated, at least. That's good to hear, Sierra said diplomatically. We look forward to sharing more of our culture with you, and perhaps learning some of yours, Cannon added. If you're willing. Jellyfish Supreme's tentacles quivered, a gesture that Lyra interpreted as a nod. Indeed, we have much to learn from each other. Lyra couldn't help but smile, a genuine feeling of hope sweeping over her. Maybe they were onto something here. Maybe, just maybe, they could turn this mess into an opportunity, a chance to show the galaxy that humanity was more than a species of accidental gods. Thank you, she said, her voice a little softer than usual. We appreciate the chance. With a ripple of tentacles, Jellyfish Supreme departed, leaving behind a room full of humans and one aquamarine ambassador who were starting to believe in their improbable success. Well, Lyra said once the silence settled again, looks like we're not getting kicked out of the galaxy just yet. Good, Cannon said. I wasn't looking forward to finding a new galaxy to crash in. Grug's skin shimmered with colors of contentment. This marks the beginning of a new era of cooperation. Your resilience has set a precedent. Sierra smiled, but there was a hint of exhaustion in her eyes. We just have to keep it up. Prove that we're not just a flash in the pan, or a punchline, Lyra said. Exactly, Sierra agreed. This is the real work. As they continued to discuss plans and strategies, Lyra felt a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. It was strange, thinking that humanity's fate had been hanging by a thread, and somehow, through laughter and diplomacy, they'd managed to weave it into something stronger. Eventually, the conversation drifted, the day's adrenaline finally giving way to fatigue. They'd achieved a lot, but there was still so much more to do. The galaxy was vast and full of challenges, but for the first time it didn't seem quite so impossible. To new allies, Grug said, his skin shifting into hues of hope and determination. And to keeping our heads, Cannon added, raising an imaginary glass for a toast. Lyra clinked her own invisible drink against his. To making the galaxy a little less terrifying. As they settled in for the night, the atmosphere in the room was one of cautious optimism. They'd faced the storm, and though the skies were still cloudy, there was a promise of clearer weather ahead. Outside, the stars continued their eternal dance, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Lyra felt like they were dancing along with them. Tomorrow would bring its own set of challenges, but for now they had each other and they had hope. That was all they needed, for now. And as they drifted off to sleep, exhausted but hopeful, the galaxy seemed a little brighter, a little kinder, and perhaps just a little more human.